Do you want to become a talk show host? Do you have a great idea? Passionate World Talk Radio is currently looking for podcast hosts for our Internet Talk radio station. Please email us at twrnetworkllc@gmail.com with your name, email address, cell phone number, and podcast topic. In return, you will receive a 3-minute intro on air to a live audience about your podcast. Remember, just email us your name, email address, and your podcast topic, and in return, you will receive a free 3-minute intro on the air. How cool is that? Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wursel, your host of Chatting with Betsy, Passionate World Talk Radio Network, where our mantra is educate, enlighten, and entertain. Folks, you're going to want to listen to this podcast because I have a very special guest with me today who wrote a book, and I'm going to just say a little bit about the bio before I tell you the name of the book. My guest is Hadassah Lieberman. Hadassah came to America in 1949 from Prague. She is a child of immigrants who survived the Holocaust. Hadassah earned a BA from Boston University in Government and Dramatics and an MA in International Relations and American Government from Northeastern University. Hadassah built a career devoted largely to public health, which has included positions at Lehman Brothers, Pfizer, and the National Research Council. I'd also like to mention that Hadassah worked with the Susan G. Komen Foundation and was instrumental in having a Race for the Cure in Israel. And Hadassah is also married to Joe Lieberman, who is a former senator and was vice of Connecticut and vice presidential candidate when he ran with Al Gore. Thank you, Hadassah Lieberman, for coming on my show. I'm so honored and privileged.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I really appreciate this. It's so special to me.
Well, thank you. It's special to me also. Hadassah, I'm going to ask you what I ask every author of a book. I know why you wrote this book. And by the way, folks, I want to say this book is a fast-reading book. It's inspirational. I loved it. My son loved it. I have to ask you, Hadassah, why did you write the book? And what would you like the reader to take away from the book?
Well, I went through a lot of years of knowing odds and ends and more about my parents' story. When my father had passed away, and then my mother died, and my brother and I both had to clear out, her apartment in Riverdale. And in so doing, all of a sudden, I came across a book that was in the Czech language, which I don't know at all. And it looked like it might be a diary. And I brought it into the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And this woman was a translator and a survivor. And she told me the content of it. And what it said, it wasn't a long book, but it was an incredibly, and I have translated it in the book. I want everyone to get the book and read it. It's so important. And my mother talks about her journey taken from her home in the Carpathian Mountains in Czechoslovakia and the Carpathian Mountain area. And my mother said at the end of what she had written, she said, I can't write more. It's too difficult. And I look to you, my children, to please finish this story. Please make sure I leave it in your hands. So when I saw that, I went nuts. I said, oh, my God, I have to think about this. And it's taken me a while, but I did it, so I'm proud.
I am amazed, Hadassah. That is some task to take on, and you did a beautiful job. And I loved how your family also added to the story with their opinions and what they had to say. I really love the story of when you were in kindergarten and you came home and you told your mom that you wanted to speak English because you knew only Yiddish at the time. And I find that amazing because my mom grew up with Yiddish-speaking parents, and my mom didn't talk Yiddish, but she understood it. But that had to be very difficult going into another environment.
Well, no.
Did you feel frustrated as a child?
No, you know what?
Before you learned English?
I was young, so I don't remember the frustration. I remember instances such as my beginning in kindergarten, because none of the kids knew Yiddish. No one knew Yiddish. They didn't know anything about anything in my background. The only immigrants were French Canadians who came in and spoke the French Canadian accent and speaking in those words that they knew. So it was really a whole big effort to adjust to a new country, to new habits and customs. I remember my mommy saying, "No, you can't wear your hair loose. Tie it back or put it in braids. Or, sweetheart, you're going to school." It was just kindergarten. "No pants. Here's your skirt and here's your tights." And I remember all the kids were dressed in pants, and it was just different. It was a different society, and in so many ways I had to adjust. And I learned to introduce my friends to my mommy and daddy, and they were different with the accents, the food, everything we had was different. But somehow I succeeded in communicating all of that to all of them. So that was good. Thank God.
That's awesome, because we need to learn and accept each other's different cultural backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. Hadassah, your parents survived the Holocaust. And did you feel pressure to be more successful, to be a shining example? You're also a rabbi's daughter. So you had a lot of expectations, I would imagine, placed on you. How did you handle that?
Oh, I'm not the only child. A lot of different children from different places and immigrants' children are given that assignment. You have to know your homework and know how you dress and know how you act and be behaved. I mean, that was the old-fashioned way of raising kids. And so you didn't misbehave intentionally. And when you did, I'll never forget. Now, this is not misbehave, but this is a typical immigrant story. I was in Gardner, Massachusetts, and picking flowers in the fields near our house, which was en route to the reservoir on the hill where my parents had us walk around. And true European tradition, you had to walk around, and my brother and I would run around and put blueberries and whatever was down there. Anyway, I remember I picked wildflowers with my friend, whose dad was a truck driver in the building not too far from us. And I remember we went to all the houses and got a little money and came home when my father came in the door and he heard that I had picked wildflowers and sold them. That was the most outrageous, embarrassing thing to him. Because what did I think? My parents had no money. I had to collect money from neighbors. for things that grew on the side of the road on our street, I had to go back and return every wildflower that I sold to each of the neighbors. I came back. I remember ringing the doorbell, and they said yes. And I'd say, I have to return my money that you gave me. And it was an embarrassment, but that was what an immigrant, my parents anyway, would do. They wouldn't accept money from the neighbors for wildflowers. So those are the kinds of things that always happened. There's another story, but that's when I was in high school, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead and back too much.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Anyway, and when I was in high school, there was an I Speak for Democracy contest in the state of Massachusetts, and I entered it. My father, of course, said, let me look at it. He edited some mistakes, of course, in his English. We were all just, getting better and better, and he was learning it on his tape recorder because he had sermons to deliver every week. And so there I was with my speech. I handed it in, and lo and behold, I won. And as a conclusion to my winning, the town, we always had Memorial Day services, and my parents always made us go as a family, standing on the side of the road, because they said, it's American patriotism. It's the soldiers. We have to thank them. And so I will never forget driving down the street in this white convertible that I sat in. And I stood up as I was moving forward, waving to the people next to the congressman from Massachusetts, not Ted Kennedy, an earlier one. And there I was, waving, and my mother and father, I know my mommy had blurry eyes of tear, because to see your daughter win this big, for democracy, this big prize to ride in a car with a congressman. So I was very blessed, and, I lived and cherished and flourished through my days of immigration to this country.
Well, your parents were very proud of you then, and they must have been very ecstatic and happy for you when you met Joe Lieberman. You went, you married into politics. You did have a first marriage to a rabbi, and which probably prepared you in a way to being, in the public eye. But how much of an adjustment was that from going from being rabbi's wife, you were rabbi's daughter, rabbi's wife, to being a politician's wife?
Well, it was a big jump. I had to, get my swim in order to cross that stream. A political job, political campaigns, representing people within a state, as my husband did, of Connecticut, and within a country. When he was doing his global campaign for vice president, and later some primaries in New Hampshire for an even higher office. It was an amazing journey, and I was very proud that we were able to connect and bond with so many people from various places and various political parties. And I'll never forget one of the times that we were out, and it happened to have been the Midwest, and I was on my separate journey while they were going separate ways, my husband and the Gores, and all the events we had to do. And I'll never forget going through the streets of the Midwest, shaking people's hands and having so many come up to me. And I didn't know if they were Republican, Democrat, Independent. They all looked at me and said, "We like you. We like you. your husband is a sincere religious man, and that makes us proud. And I'll never forget those times. I felt we were bonding with the American public and with love. There was none of what we hear about today, the ugliness on the streets that exposes itself too much through the internet and other means. So it was a very special, I had learned a lot as a child, as a daughter, as a grown-up, but entering into the political realm was a whole different being and tough. But we mastered it, and we did as well as we could, and unfortunately lost at the end. But that's politics. You have to be ready to win and ready to lose.
Hadassah, you had lived such a fascinating life, and I had to tell the audience, this book is filled with such heart-touching stories. I love how you met Joe, your roommate, a friend introduced you. I love how you merged your families and you had blended it. There was no mention of, stepchildren. They were all your children. I love that. I love that you and Joe, you had your Sabbath, you observed it, and you kept your traditions during the political campaign. People knew where you stood. And I was so proud. I told my son that, this is the first time that I know of that a Jewish person was running as a vice presidential candidate. I was proud. As a Jewish American, a granddaughter of immigrants, I was proud. I have to say that.
There were so many people voicing that throughout the country, calls and all kinds of things. Very proud time.
Yes, and I was just in awe, and I love that also, Hadassah, that you have pictures in your book and that you talk about the Holocaust, because I feel that as the Holocaust survivors are dying off, that it will be forgotten about, and it should never be forgotten about. So I want to thank you for showing pictures and talking about the Holocaust. And I have to ask you a question. As a young child, I sat in the synagogue and watched movies of the Holocaust and had nightmares for days. Were you shown movies, and did your parents talk deeply about it? Did they say what they went through to you?
There were so many stories and chapters of that amazing, horrible journey that they took that I used to hear odds and ends pieces, but I never saw a diary that my mother wrote, which is the one I translated. My father wrote a memoir also, and so I learned about things from him in his book and in some of the stories. And some of, the memorial prayer for the dead is the Kaddish. And I remember my father's words as he was describing all of the people who became frozen walking with him toward, it was different areas in the cold snow. And I remember him saying to me, the worry was no one will ever say Kaddish over these deep, horrible instances where the bodies fell down on the sand, on the snow. So I remember there was just the agony. There was no normalcy. And death surrounded them to such an extent. And my mother she used to tell me, I've forgotten a lot. My mind blanked out on many of these stories because it was unbearable, and it was the way that she survived. So her earlier diary that she wrote was something that meant a great deal to me. And unfortunately, as you said, there are so many of the survivors who are dead or going slowly but surely, because age is something that we're all guaranteed to die. We're mortal. And so there's so much to be said, and yet so little time for any of these survivors. So as children or grandchildren of these people, it's our obligation to remember that, to seek it out, to write it at least for your own children, to try to save as much as you can from grandparents, from parents, to children, to grandchildren.
Yes, I agree 100%. Should never ever be forgotten. Do you feel, Hadassah, that now in the climate that we're in, that anti-Semitism is on the rise?
You know, I'm so confused because during 2000, the national campaign, we never heard any anti-Semitism. We never saw things, anything anti-Semitic. I mean, it was a whole different place for all of us. And this has been a new experience, which, unfortunately, the Internet, the iPhones, the iPads allow people who live in that sphere of anger and nastiness to talk to each other and make them feel bigger and better by finding people who understand them and repeat what they are saying. So there's a phrase, Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world, to make the world better, which is really an obligation each of us has in our own small, medium, or large spheres of influence. Because in each family, parents really have to teach their children how to speak and how not to speak, and how to respect and how to accumulate history. And some of the reasons that those films were shown, I just saw something the other day, new films of the same period of time, the Shoah, the Holocaust, and it's amazing. It never seems to be calm. It never seems to be something that doesn't sicken the self and make us question the humanity of man for the killers of these people and killers of young children. There's 1 million children in camps in the Shoah were killed. And from what Father DeBow, who is a wonderful priest who goes out and finds Jews who have been shot and put in holes, pits, big earthen graves, so to speak, because they were just thrown in. And he finds them by trying to discover what some of the locals had to do. They were the ones that had to bury these people. So there's no end to the number. And he says it's not 6 million. Who knows how many more it is beyond. And he's begun to keep that record with Jews in mind and with all in mind. We don't ever want those things to repeat, and yet we're all fearful. So there's more anti-Semitism heard today, but I don't know if these were voices didn't speak in the past and we didn't hear, and now they're rising to prominence. I don't know. The people around us are not that way, and I'm praying, I'm hoping that this is just a small group that is hearing itself breathe and speak. And that's a global speech on the Internet.
Hadassah, I'd like to ask you, as we come to the near ending, what would you like people to know about you and to remember you? How would you like to be remembered, Hadassah Lieberman?
This is a story, obviously, from me, about me, my parents, my sibling, my husband, my marriage. And I wanted to, because I came into this position by marrying Joe Lieberman, who was the man I fell in love with, and now 38 years later, marriage, we are still in love and still respect each other and know each other. And I felt, and I feel that what I want out of this book is a record, a real record of all the ugliness that I encountered through the stories on my parents, and how I was an immigrant, and how I was able, through a very tolerant, loving town, Gardner, Massachusetts, that knew nothing about the Holocaust, that knew nothing about the Yiddish language, to teach and hope that together we can grow and be stronger. And I wanted to write about divorce and how we don't use the word step. You marry a partner, that child is part of their body, part of their flesh and blood. And you coming into a marriage must understand that. I know it isn't easy for everyone in various marriages, but for those of us who can do it, we must do it. So it's all those lessons, all those words that I put into that book. I just want to communicate it, and I want them to understand that light can come in to someone born out of such an evil, difficult time that my parents had gone through, that I can show the light of immigration, the light of remarriage, the light of strength, and being a strong, proud Jew. That is what I want to communicate.
And you most certainly did in your book. I want to encourage my audience to purchase this book. It is a wonderful book to read. It's inspirational. It's uplifting. Where can they buy your book, Hadassah?
Well, it can be bought through Brandeis University, the publishers, and it can also be found on Amazon.com. And I also did a video. I did it personally, reading the book. So that's also available through, when you look at the Amazon writing on the book. Yeah, so for people that
sounds great.
I did that for my children also, and for other people who don't read or want to take the time when they drive, for whatever reason. So I just would like people really sincerely to buy the book, to keep that history inside them and to share it with others. So thank you so much, Betsy.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Hadassah. I had to ask you this just out of curiosity. Would you ever consider making a movie, whether a TV movie or out in the cinemas, about your life?
I would do whatever I need to do to communicate what I think is important. It's important to know when I was up on those podiums and talking about me and my life, and then people would say, they'd identify me. But they never had a Holocaust survivor as the wife of a candidate running for national office or in the Senate. So I feel I'm blessed with that place and that feeling that I have from the American way of government and how we must make sure we keep our democracy strong and intact.
Yes. Well, in my opinion, Hadassah, my humble opinion is I would love to see a play about your life, and I would love to see a movie based on your book, because I think it would be excellent for people to go to a play or a theater to see it. And I want to thank you again, Hadassah Lieberman, for coming on and sharing your story, for writing this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank you on behalf of my own family. Thank you, and this radio station. Thank you so much. Folks,
I send my love.
Thank you. Folks, you need to get this book. It is really an awesome book. And to read it, you just feel like you are knowing Hadassah and feeling her American story and relating to Hadassah. She's a working mom. She was a single mom, remarriage. I mean, she lived quite a life, and it's really a life story that you need to read. And please share this podcast to help others. I want to thank Lisa Warren for arranging this interview, who is president of Lisa Warren Public Relations. And if you are looking for a publicist, Lisa gets the job done, and I know that for a fact. And I want to thank Jeannie White, who is station manager, Passionate World Talk Radio Network, for producing the show and writing the blog. Please read the blog for further information. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio Network, who makes all this possible so we can come and share our stories. You could also hear this podcast on your favorite podcast outlet. I'm on Spotify and Spreaker, just to name a couple. Please subscribe. You will never know who I'm going to have on as a guest. And in a world where you could be anything, folks, please be kind. And when we share our stories, we're helping each other. We are helping each other knowing what we are going through, because everyone thinks they're alone in their experience, and they're not. You're not alone. There's people who have gone through things you're going through or have gone through. We're all human beings. And I want to thank you all for listening and for sharing. And just, thank you so much. I appreciate doing what I do. So until we chat again, this is Betsy Wursel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network. Bye, everybody.
Do you want to become a talk show host? Do you have a great idea? Passionate World Talk Radio is currently looking for podcast hosts for our Internet Talk Radio station. Please email us at twrnetworkllc@gmail.com with your name, email address, cell phone number, and podcast topic. In return, you will receive a 3-minute intro on air to a live audience about your podcast. Remember, just email us your name, email address, and your podcast topic, and in return, you will receive a free 3-minute intro on the air. How cool is that? Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.